Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and will make you exceedingly numerous. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the ancestor of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the ancestor of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout your generations, for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. God said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. Hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people.
Thanks be to God.
A reading from Romans. The promise that he would inherit the world did not come to Abraham or to his descendants through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. If it is the adherents of the law who are to be heirs, faith is null and the promise is void. For the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, neither is there violation. For this reason it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his descendants, not only to the adherents of the law, but also to those who share the faith of Abraham. For he is the father of all of us, as it is written, I have made you the father of many nations. In the presence of God in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. Hoping against hope, he believed that he would become the father of many nations, according to what was said. So numerous shall be your descendants be. He did not weaken in faith when he considered his own body, which was already as good as dead, for he was about 100 years old, or when he considered the barrenness of Sarah's womb. No distrust made him waver concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God, being fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised. Therefore his faith was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now the words, it was reckoned to him, were written not for his sake alone, but for ours also. It will be reckoned to us who believe in him who raised Jesus our Lord from the dead, who was handed over to death for our trespasses, and was raised for our justification. Hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people.
Thanks be to God.
The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus began to teach his disciples that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Well, we have made it to the second week of Lent. And while we have made it to the second week of Lent, the world is still turning, and things are still happening. Things that we might call good, things that we might call bad. And I think this is a really good time to think about what's good and what's bad, and what kind of lives we're living. Are we seeking something we call good? Are we seeking, without knowing, because I don't think anyone does this on purpose, something that is bad? I'm going to put this in pretty black and white terms. So let's talk about sort of option one, which is what we've seen a lot of the last few weeks. Violence, anger, fear, despair. Does anyone willingly choose these things? I don't think so. They happen. We'll get to that in a little bit. But we have plenty of this. We've got all sorts of stuff going on. We have people who don't have enough food to eat. We have people who cannot get jobs because of the color of their skin or their religious preference or whatever. It's all kinds of stuff like that going on, and it's just there. And sometimes we really see it right in our faces, like we did at the school shooting 10 days ago. Well, there's the other option, which is being happy, being nice, being kind, being relaxed, peaceful, compassionate, having everything we need. How does that happen? Well, we'll talk about that too. But we see that that exists alongside of all of the bad stuff that we notice. I mean, for some reason, every day there are lots and lots of babies being born, right? Babies are kind of, yes, life is worth living. People go to the hospital and have surgery, and they come out and they're better. That's a good thing, right? I actually was amazed that the women's, not amazed, but I was very happy that the women's hockey team took gold in the Olympics. But the crowning achievement of the United States was not in hockey, but curling, men's curling. Yeah, exactly. What's that? We won, the men's team won the gold medal in curling. So if you don't know what that is, and I assure you I barely know what it is, but you couldn't miss it on the news, you look it up online. It is, I think it's a sport that developed where, in a country or a place where there was 11 months of sheet ice, 10 feet thick, and nothing else to do. But, okay, so that's a good thing. You know, we have lots of medals for interesting sports. And these are people who persevered. I doubt if you get big sponsorships for doing curling, right? Yeah. So anyway, so there's good and there's bad, or what we would call good and bad, right? Well, I think that we all want to live a good life, right? How do we do that? Well, I'm standing here because I think the answer is, if we weren't Episcopalians, we'd have Bibles in the pews, but anyway, it's in the scriptures, right? Let's look at our gospel. Jesus is teaching his end. He's saying, here's what I came to do. I am going to suffer greatly. I am going to be rejected by all peoples. The chief priests, the elders, the scribes, everybody. And of course, he'll be left alone at the end. And he's going to die a horrible death on the cross. And he's telling them that's what he's doing. Now, Peter, kind of the chief disciple, takes him aside. He doesn't want to embarrass him in front of the others. And he says, wait a minute, don't say that. That's a terrible thing to say. You're not a violent person. You're not going to get killed. This is awful. Don't do that. Well, what does Jesus say? He doesn't say, okay, Peter, that was a little extreme. I'll rephrase that. I misspoke. No, he gets out there and he says to him, you are Satan. Shut your mouth. You do not understand anything You are setting your mind on human things and not divine. And he says it in front of everybody. And then for good measure, he calls not just the disciples, but all the crowds and says, listen to me. I am going to tell you what to do. You need to deny yourselves. You need to carry the cross like I'm going to. That's how you're going to do good in this world and the next. That is goodness for you. That is peace and love and compassion and all of those good things. That's how you get it. Okay. Does that make any sense? Well, it does, I believe. And Jesus explains exactly how. But it's pretty shocking. Now, the first thing he did is he said it openly. He made sure that that little whisper that Peter put in his ear was not the final word. We have talked repeatedly about how things that are hidden can cause harm. If a misunderstanding or a shameful act is hidden away and doesn't see the light, it gains strength and becomes destructive. We've talked about that the last few weeks. And that's what would have happened if what Peter said had been what people believed. Jesus has to come out in the open. And if it means that Peter's a little embarrassed, well, that's too bad. Because he can't let that misunderstanding sit. It will cause problems. It will foster violence just for a start. But Jesus says something kind of weird then. Because he doesn't say, oh no, I'm not going to die on a cross. I'm not going to be captured and shamed and tortured and rejected. No, that part was wrong. No. He says, this is how you get to the good. This is how you get to divine things and not human things. Well, if that's true, how much do we really want divine things? Does that sound good? Doesn't sound very good to me. But remember, I'm the one who doesn't give up chocolate for Lent, so. Well, I think that what Jesus is saying, and Mark, is pretty precise. He doesn't use a lot of extra words here. But what Jesus is saying is that our personal, individual, not even selfish always, but sometimes, needs, desires, worries are not the perspective to take when we're looking at life. This life, all life, eternal life. That is not the right perspective. We need the divine perspective. The same thing can be human and divine. Because everything's divine. God created everything, right? It's how we approach it. And if we think that our little human understanding and perspective is the right one, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to go down a road that could lead to fear and despair and even violence. He's saying, don't go down that road. Look at things the way that God sees them. That's what Jesus did when he came and said, okay, I'm going to die miserably, but it's going to be a good thing. Well, okay. But when we have a divine perspective, we realize that everything doesn't have to go our way. What things have to go is God's way. Because God is concerned with everybody and everything. So when everything is going well for everybody, things are going well for us. Because we're everybody, right? We're included in that. So that's the perspective Jesus is taking. And for him, it involved a pretty crummy end of his life. I hope the beginning was better. But he's willing to do that because he knows it's going to bring a greater good. So sometimes things that seem bad maybe have a good outcome. Things that seem good have a bad outcome. Like if Peter had continued to whisper in secret, that would have been a good thing. And Jesus' death, the ultimate sacrifice, is not a bad thing. Well, I think also, in case you were wondering where I got this idea, look at the Old Testament reading. We have, all during Lent, we have covenants. Each week we're going to hear about a covenant that tells us that God is always present with us. God promises to stay with us, and keeps God's promise. This week, it's Abraham and Sarah. And we see them when they start off. They must have got married young. So let's say Abraham was 20, 25, and Sarah was, I think they're 10 years apart, so maybe she was 15. That's what you did back then. So they get married, and they want to have children, right? That's many people who do, and in those days, in that culture, you had lots of kids. That was just what you did. And they looked forward to that. But it didn't work. And they couldn't understand. Here they are, following God. They're moving. God says, I will take you to a place that I will show you. And they go, okay. They don't ask any questions. They don't say, wait a minute, where exactly? You know, if they don't have an AJ's, I'm not going. You know? So they just go. They follow God. They trust God. They believe in God. And they keep saying, God, why don't we have children? You know, we want children. We're supposed to have children. What's going on here? And they don't. God just makes these kind of vague promises, but they don't. So they spend a long time without children. In fact, they get so desperate that Sarah decides that maybe Abraham should have a child with her maidservant. Well, that did not turn out well, did it? In terms of family dynamics, that was very painful and difficult. So eventually, now Abraham is 99, I think Sarah was 90, and at that point God says, guess what? Now you get to have a baby. Can you imagine? Just think of being 50 and having a baby. Anyway, so God said, yeah, this is what's going to happen. And you're going to have one boy, and he's going to be the parent of all these generations, all over the world. Well, yeah, that's great. Okay, they finally have one child. That's good. That was not what they wanted, was it? And they probably never saw their grandchildren. So their whole perspective on this was different. And they ended up doing something that was not ideal for them because they couldn't wait for God. So you see how hard it is to wait for God, to trust God, to believe that God's purposes are in fact what needs to happen. And when we're waiting and wondering, we can make mistakes. Now, of course, in the grand scheme of things, with the divine perspective, or at least some historical distance, we can say, oh, well, Ishmael is the father of an enormous group of people, and Isaac is the father of a great number of people, so it worked out well. But I bet it was really painful for them, because they couldn't quite get the divine perspective. And it's really hard to get that. We need to pray, we need to wonder, we need to talk to people, we need to read the scriptures, come to church, we need to do all sorts of things, and we need to forgive ourselves when we mess up, because it's really tough. But that's what Jesus is teaching here. I'm going to go die, and things will happen to me that no one ever wants to happen to them, but that's actually good. He's not saying you have to die, although maybe. We don't know. It's hard. It's really hard. But we can do this because the Bible tells us so. Gives us examples. Gives us things to think about and chew on and meditate on. And shows us that we trust God and God takes care of us. That's the Abraham story as it's interpreted by Paul. There is another contemporary example of this same, well, a difficult situation that I think so far it's still unraveling, or I shouldn't say unraveling, unfolding, it's better, but where somebody really has been able to take a divine perspective and is also a wonderful example for us. Does the name Caleb Mueller ring a bell? She was a young woman who'd gone to NAU, and after NAU had gone to Turkey to help people refugees. And she ended up in Syria, and in 2013 she was captured by some of the local insurgents, and eventually I don't think we know exactly what happened, but eventually she died. She was probably tortured and very badly maltreated. And anyway, she died. Her parents live in Prescott. So she went with the belief that she could give up a comfortable lifestyle for at least some period of time and go help people who had no lifestyle, who were living in refugee camps or worse, and who were being persecuted and tortured and all these sorts of things. And that's exactly what happened to her. But she went, I think, with a divine perspective. I can give up something to help other people. So she died. Her remains have never been returned to her parents. And just this weekend, in the newspaper, there was an article that 2 of her captors have been found and captured, and they're going to face trial, probably in Brussels, at the International Court. And her parents made a statement. They said, if they are found guilty, please don't execute them. Because that would be committing the violence that Kayla went to that area to work against, to stand up and say, this is wrong. This is not violence that leads to any kind of good. Her violent death, they want to lead to good, not to more death. And I have a quote from them: we must be true to our children's commitment to humanity. I believe we're seeing some of that commitment in the students in Florida, who have started a national, I hope, movement discussion about what the role of violence is in our country. And we'll get some new thoughts going, because we're pretty stuck. And I believe Kayla Mueller also is a good example, and her parents, of how we can get unstuck. I keep looking for that divine perspective of what is best for everybody, and what we can do for that, even if it costs us a lot. Amen.